Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Usually when we talk about observing the universe, there is this expectation of perfect clarity. Like looking through a freshly cleaned window.
Right.
You point a multi-billion-dollar telescope at some random patch of sky, the image downloads, and the astronomer just points at the screen and says, there it is, a new galaxy.
It is a very appealing fantasy, yeah. I mean, we really crave that binary simplicity.
Yeah.
The idea that we either see the object or we don't.
Exactly.
We like our data pristine, and we like our space missions to be loud, triumphant, highly visible successes.
But then you step into the actual reality of the cosmos, and suddenly that freshly cleaned window is completely fogged over.
Very fogged over.
Yeah. We are looking at a universe that is, honestly, remarkably elusive. It's a landscape defined just as much by what we cannot see and what we cannot hear as by what we can.
It is the absolute definition of observational muddy waters. I mean, we're constantly searching for the signal in the noise. And that is exactly what we're doing today. We aren't just reporting what is happening across the globe in the solar system. We are trying to extract the underlying mechanics of, well, why it matters.
And welcome to you, the listener, to this custom-tailored deep dive. Today is Friday, March 20, 2026.
We're glad you're here.
We know you are busy, and you want those aha moments without just drowning in information overload. So today, we are going to connect the dots. We're going from the silence of deep space to the microscopic engineering of our own biology to the shifting architecture of the internet, and finally into a deeply complex geopolitical crisis that is quite literally reshaping the price of the food on your table.
It's a massive, tangled web of cause and effect.
It really is. So let's start by looking upward, because the theme of invisible forces is playing out right now on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Ah, yes, Artemis 2.
Yeah, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is prepping for a potential April 1 launch of the Artemis 2 mission.
Which is huge.
Massive. This is the Space Launch System rocket, aiming to send astronauts around the moon for the first time in over half a century. But I was reading about the preparation, and the biggest enemy they are fighting right now isn't gravity. It is sound.
The acoustic violence of a rocket launch it's something that is incredibly difficult to even conceptualize.
Really?
Yeah. When you ignite a vehicle of that magnitude, you aren't just generating thrust. You are generating acoustic energy, sound waves.
Okay.
And these sound waves are so powerful, they can literally reflect off the launch pad, hit the rocket, and shake the entire vehicle to pieces before it even clears the tower.
Wait, hold on. Sound waves alone can destroy a multi-billion-dollar rocket.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because sound is just pressure moving through the air, right? At the decibel levels produced by the Space Launch System, that pressure becomes a physical destructive force. It causes extreme resonant frequencies in the metal.
Wow.
So to prevent the rocket from basically shattering itself, NASA uses a massive water sound suppression system.
How does that work?
They dump hundreds of thousands of gallons of water directly onto the launch pad in a matter of seconds. The water droplets physically absorb and dampen that acoustic energy.
That makes me think of trying to, tune a million-pound musical instrument so its own vibration doesn't just tear it apart.
That is a brilliant way to picture it, actually. But dumping all that water creates a secondary problem.
Of course it does.
Yeah, and engineers are solving this using a framework called LAVA that stands for Launch, Ascent, and Vehicle Aerodynamics.
Okay, I saw that acronym in the reports, but the technical explanation was super dense. What exactly is LAVA doing?
To put it simply, LAVA uses computational fluid dynamics.
Okay, English, please.
Right, sorry. Imagine using supercomputers to create a highly detailed, real-time video game physics engine.
Okay, I'm with you.
It mathematically simulates how the superheated exhaust gases from the rocket crash into the atmosphere. And crucially, it models how those gases interact with that massive flood of suppression water.
So they are basically mapping the chaos.
They have to. Data from the uncrewed Artemis 1 launch showed that while the water suppresses the sound, it also vaporizes instantly.
Because of the heat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when it vaporizes, it redirects the exhaust gases in entirely unpredictable ways. This creates massive, unexpected pressure spikes on the mobile launcher tower.
Oh, wow.
So the LAVA framework allows them to mathematically model this invisible interplay of sound, heat, and fluid. That way they can adjust the water flow and keep the astronauts safe. They are literally engineering the acoustics.
Mastering the invisible forces of leaving Earth. That is wild.
It really is.
But once we actually get out there, The silence of space becomes its own terrifying problem. There is a European Space Agency mission, the Proba-3 solar eclipse satellite, that just reestablished contact after a full month of absolute silence.
The anxiety surrounding Proba-3 is very unique because of the mission's architecture.
How so?
Well, it's not one satellite. It is two separate spacecraft flying in a highly precise tandem orbit.
Oh.
The goal is to study the sun's corona, which is its outer atmosphere. To do that, one spacecraft acts as an occulter,
Like a shield.
essentially a flying shield that blocks the blinding main disk of the sun. It casts a shadow perfectly onto the second spacecraft, which flies behind it taking photographs.
So they are artificially creating a solar eclipse in the middle of space?
Precisely. But the orbital mechanics required to do that are mind-boggling.
I can imagine.
If their alignment is off by mere millimeters, the blinding light of the sun breaches the shadow and the mission fails.
Millimeters in space.
Yes. So when a highly complex, interconnected system like that simply stops communicating for a month, the control room assumes the worst. The relief when that telemetry signal finally pinged back must have been overwhelming.
I imagine there were a lot of very heavy exhales in that control room.
Undoubtedly.
Unfortunately, NASA is currently living through the darker side of that exact scenario.
Yes, they are.
The AVEN orbiter, the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution spacecraft, has been completely silent since mid-January. They went into a planned communications blackout, and it just never woke back up. They are still actively searching for it.
It serves as a stark reminder of the environment we are operating in. You can possess the most advanced telecommunications and orbital technology in human history.
Right.
But the distances are vast, the solar radiation is brutal, and single points of failure exist in every system. Space is an incredibly unforgiving arena.
It really is. And the limits of our observation just keep popping up in the reports this week.
How do you mean?
Well, astronomers recently found these 3 exoplanets that the media is calling cotton candy planets.
Yes.
They are the least dense planets ever discovered. But the fascinating part to me is that they are covered in a high-altitude haze that is so thick that the James Webb Space Telescope, which is supposed to be our ultimate eye in the sky, right?
Yeah.
It cannot penetrate the haze. It can't see through it.
James Webb relies heavily on a technique called spectroscopy. When a planet passes in front of its host star, Webb captures the starlight filtering through the planet's atmosphere.
Okay.
Different chemicals absorb different wavelengths of light, leaving a unique barcode in the spectrum. That is how we know if a planet has water, or methane, or carbon dioxide.
But if there's a haze...
Right. If the planet is entirely shrouded in an opaque haze, the starlight simply cannot get through.
Wait, you just lost me.
Oh.
If Webb can't see through the clouds and we can't see the actual planet beneath the haze, how can astronomers possibly know these planets have the density of cotton candy? That sounds like a wild guess.
I get why it sounds like that.
Yeah.
It does seem contradictory, but it relies on 2 entirely different observational methods that do not require seeing the surface at all.
Okay, listening.
First, we use the transit method. We watch the planet pass in front of its star, and we measure exactly how much the star's light dims.
Got it.
That dimming tells us the planet's physical size, its total volume.
So a bigger shadow means a bigger volume.
Correct. The second method is radial velocity. Planets have gravity, and as they orbit, they pull slightly on their host star.
Okay.
We measure that tiny wobble in the star's movement, which tells us the mass, or the weight, of the planet pulling on it.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. Once you have the volume from the shadow and the mass from the wobble, you can calculate the overall density. And for these 3 planets, the math results in something incredibly puffy and light.
Cotton candy.
Exactly. But what that thick haze is actually made of remains a total mystery because of that visual blockade.
We are calculating the invisible, just like the cosmic echo story that came out this week.
That was a phenomenal discovery.
Astronomers confirmed a gamma ray burst, a GRB, that was estimated to be as powerful as 1 billion suns. 1 billion. Yet our telescopes entirely missed the actual explosion.
Gamma ray bursts are the most energetic events in the universe since the Big Bang. They are typically triggered when a massive star collapses into a black hole or when 2 dense neutron stars collide.
And they missed it.
In a matter of seconds, they release more energy than our sun will emit over its entire 10 billion year lifespan.
Seriously, how do we miss an explosion of that magnitude?
Because they are highly directional. Imagine a lighthouse beam.
Nope.
The energy is focused into tight jets. If those jets are not pointing directly at Earth at the exact moment the explosion occurs, Our instruments won't register the primary flash.
Oh, so it just shoots past us in a different direction.
Exactly. In this specific instance, astronomers didn't see the burst. They saw the reflection.
The echo.
Yes. The light from the explosion traveled outward across space, slammed into a massive distant cloud of cosmic dust, and reflected back toward our telescopes.
Wow.
By analyzing that delayed light echo, scientists could reverse engineer the sheer scale of the initial explosion. We only ever see a tiny fraction of the cosmic violence happening around us.
And sometimes that violence has permanent consequences. The University of Arizona just published a study regarding the Small Magellanic Cloud, the SMT.
Right, our neighbor.
Yeah, it's a dwarf galaxy that orbits our own Milky Way. The researchers confirmed that the SMC was essentially shattered millions of years ago by a cosmic crash with the Large Magellanic Cloud.
For centuries, humanity looked at galaxies as these serene, isolated islands of stars floating in the void. Discoveries like this prove the universe is a highly dynamic and interactive arena.
It's messy.
Very messy. The SMC and LMC didn't just bump into each other. Their immense gravitational fields interacted as they passed, tearing stars and massive clouds of gas away from each other, fundamentally and permanently altering their structures.
Does this have implications for the Milky Way? I mean, we are orbiting in the exact same neighborhood.
It guarantees our own future evolution. The Milky Way is currently on a collision course with the Andromeda Galaxy.
Right, I've heard that.
While it won't occur for billions of years, acknowledging that these galactic crashes are a standard mechanism of the universe means our own galaxy is destined to be reshaped by the exact same gravitational forces.
The forces shaping the universe are ancient and they are violent. But, we don't need to look millions of light years away to find history being rewritten by ancient violence.
That's true.
We can just look down. The Earth has its own buried secrets, and scientists are using ice to understand unseen explosions on our own planet, much like they use light echoes in space.
The parallel is striking, really. We are looking at the Greenland ice core mystery here.
This story is so fascinating. For years, scientists have debated the cause of the Younger Dryas cooling period.
Right.
This was a sudden, basically apocalyptic climate shift, roughly 12,800 years ago, where temperatures in Greenland plummeted by 10 degrees Celsius.
A massive drop.
The prevailing theory for a long time was an extraterrestrial impact, like a comet hit the Earth, threw dust into the atmosphere, and caused the freeze.
The comet theory was incredibly compelling because of the evidence found in the ice. Ice cores are essentially vertical timelines of Earth's atmosphere.
Like tree rings, but ice.
Exactly. Year after year, snow falls and traps microscopic air bubbles and particles, compressing into layers. Researchers found a massive spike in platinum deep in those ice cores, corresponding roughly to the 12,800-year mark.
And platinum means space rock.
Platinum is heavily associated with meteorites, yes.
But the new research completely overturns that. They proved it wasn't a comet. It was massive, sustained volcanic eruptions right here on Earth. How did they figure that out if the platinum was there?
It came down to a much more rigorous analysis of the timeline within the ice layers. When scientists looked closely, they realized the platinum anomaly actually appeared decades after the cooling phase had already begun.
Oh.
If a comet impact caused the freeze, the chemical signature would be immediate and simultaneous with the temperature drop.
The timing didn't line up at all.
It didn't. Furthermore, elevated levels of specific volcanic sediments were found slightly deeper in the ice, perfectly aligning with the onset of the cooling.
So the platinum was just a coincidence.
The delayed platinum spike is now believed to be a localized anomaly, not a global impact marker. Earth's own geology choked the atmosphere with ash and sulfur, reflecting sunlight and causing the freeze. We spent years looking out for a cosmic culprit when the engine of destruction was boiling beneath our feet.
And that engine never stops. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is erupting as we speak.
Yes, quite violently.
The reports detail lava fountains shooting 1,770 feet into the air. It has already spewed 325 million cubic yards of lava, and authorities have issued an aviation code red because ash is blanketing communities 50 miles away.
Concurrently, a 6.7 magnitude earthquake struck the South Shetland Islands in Antarctica.
Right.
It occurred at a depth of 10 kilometers. There is no tsunami threat, but it reinforces the reality that the Earth's crust is a restless, dynamic system of tectonic plates constantly grinding and releasing immense energy.
Which creates such an incredible contrast to me. The Earth is violently reshaping itself with 1,700-foot lava fountains, yet human beings are learning to reshape reality with absolute precision.
We are, yeah.
We are moving from the macro violence of geology to the microscopic mastery of chemistry. Scientists have just created a single atom catalyst using indium atoms to convert CO2 carbon dioxide into methanol fuel.
To understand the magnitude of this breakthrough, we really have to look at how chemical catalysts usually work. A catalyst accelerates a chemical reaction without being consumed by it.
Okay.
Historically, in industrial processes, we use clumped metal atoms. Imagine a microscopic chunk of metal.
Okay, a tiny nugget.
Right. When you expose that nugget to CO2, only the atoms resting on the very outer surface of the clump interact with the gas. The thousands of atoms trapped inside the clump do absolutely nothing.
That seems like a waste.
It is highly inefficient, and it requires a massive input of heat and energy to force the chemical reaction to occur.
So the old method is like trying to tackle carbon emissions with a shotgun. It is messy, it takes a lot of explosive energy, and most of it misses the target entirely.
Exactly. This new method isolates single atoms of the element indium. By anchoring these individual atoms to a substrate, every single atom is active and exposed.
Wow.
It is the chemical equivalent of a highly trained sniper. It drastically lowers the energy required to break the strong molecular bonds of the CO2 gas and reform it into liquid methanol.
And methanol is incredibly useful, right?
Extremely versatile. It can be used directly as a clean-burning fuel or as a foundational building block for manufacturing sustainable plastics and chemicals.
That's amazing.
We are literally taking the primary greenhouse gas responsible for modern climate warming and engineering it atom by atom into a usable resource.
That mastery over the microscopic isn't just happening in chemistry either. We're seeing it in biology. Researchers just published findings on the blood of pythons, of all things.
Pythons are a biological marvel of extreme adaptation.
I mean, they eat entire animals in one go, right?
Yes. When a python consumes a massive meal, sometimes prey equivalent to its own body weight, its digestive system undergoes a radical transformation. Its metabolic rate can increase by a factor of 40 in a matter of hours.
Wait, a 40 times increase?
The organs literally expand to handle the load.
I get lethargic after eating a slightly heavy lunch.
The contrast is stark, yes. Researchers have isolated a specific postprandial metabolite.
What?
Postprandial. It just means after eating.
Okay.
It's a chemical compound produced in the blood immediately after eating that acts as the trigger for this massive metabolic shift. This metabolite facilitates an intense communication pathway between the python's gut and its brain, signaling the body to ramp up energy burn.
So the leap they're making is, if we understand how a snake hyperaccelerates its metabolism, we could apply that to humans.
The hope is to isolate this specific molecule and mimic the gut-brain pathway pharmacologically.
For weight loss.
Yes. If researchers can safely trigger even a fraction of that metabolic response in humans, it paves the way for an entirely new, highly effective class of obesity medications. Nature has been running evolutionary experiments in extreme environments for millions of years. We are now mining extreme animal physiology for human medical solutions.
And when we can't find a chemical solution, we are apparently just growing physical replacements.
The esophageal tissue study.
Yeah. UK scientists have successfully grown functioning food pipes esophageal tissues in a lab and transplanted them into mini pigs.
This is the absolute frontier of tissue engineering. The mechanics of this process are fascinating. They do not just clump cells together. They start with a biological scaffold.
What does that mean?
Typically, this is a donor organ that goes through a process called decellularization. They wash away all the original living cells, leaving behind only the extracellular matrix,
The matrix.
the structural protein skeleton of the organ.
Oh, so they have the empty framework of an esophagus.
Exactly. Then they take stem cells from the patient, or in this case, the mini pig, and seed those cells onto the empty scaffold.
Okay.
Because the cells belong to the recipient, as they grow and populate the structure, they create a living, functioning organ that the recipient's immune system will recognize as its own. There is no risk of rejection.
That is mind-blowing. How quickly does a procedure like this move from animal models to human hospitals?
Porcine models pigs are biologically and anatomically very similar to humans. Given the success of these functioning transplants, we are likely looking at early human clinical trials within the next 3 to 5 years.
That fast?
Yes. The initial applications would likely target pediatric patients born with severe esophageal defects or adults recovering from aggressive esophageal cancer.
We're pulling carbon out of the air atom by atom, and we are using stem cells to rebuild human organs. But as we manipulate the physical and biological world, we're simultaneously engineering a digital reality that is, frankly, rapidly spiraling beyond human control.
The internet is undergoing a foundational shift.
The very paradigm of what the internet is and who it is built for is fracturing.
Yes.
Let's unpack the prediction made this week by Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare. For context, Cloudflare provides the security and infrastructure for roughly 20% of the entire web. They see the underlying plumbing of the internet.
They see everything.
Prince stated that generative AI will cause online bot traffic to exceed human traffic globally by 2027, next year.
Consider the magnitude of that threshold. Since its inception, the internet has been a network designed for humans to communicate, share information, and transact with other humans.
Right.
If automated AI-driven traffic surpasses 50%, the internet fundamentally transitions into a machine-to-machine network where human beings are the minority users.
Think about your own daily digital life. Think about the last 5 emails you received. By next year, statistical probability suggests that 3 of those emails will be drafted by an AI sent to an AI assistant you employ, which will then read and summarize them for you.
Exactly.
You, the human, are being actively cut out of your own communication loop.
And the volume of data required to facilitate that machine-to-machine communication is staggering. Companies like Cloudflare are scrambling to redesign data centers and routing protocols just to handle the sheer infrastructural strain of AI agents constantly pinging each other.
And we are seeing these AI agents infiltrate physical spaces, too. Devices like Otter.ai and Plod.ai are exploding in popularity in 2026.
The AI note-takers.
Yeah. You bring them into a meeting, and they record the audio, transcribe a conversation, summarize the key points, and automatically assign action items to the staff.
It sounds incredibly efficient, but the rapid adoption has vastly outpaced our social etiquette and our legal frameworks. The privacy concerns are mounting globally.
Because no one knows who is actually listening.
Exactly. If you walk into a corporate boardroom or log into a sensitive virtual meeting and 3 different attendees have deployed automated AI agents to record the session, who owns that proprietary audio?
Right.
Where is that data being stored? More importantly, are the companies providing these AI tools using your confidential corporate strategy meetings to train their future language models?
It is the wild west of corporate espionage and data harvesting. And the major tech giants are acutely aware that whoever controls the hardware interface controls the data flow.
Which brings us to Amazon.
Yes, the report that Amazon is internally developing a new smartphone, currently codenamed Transformer.
This represents a massive strategic pivot. Amazon attempted to enter the smartphone market over a decade ago with the Fire Phone, which was a spectacular commercial failure.
Oh, I remember the Fire Phone.
But the landscape has changed.
Yeah.
Amazon realizes that to remain competitive in the AI arms race against Apple and Google, they cannot rely on third-party devices.
Because if Apple bakes Siri deeply into the iOS kernel and Google integrates Gemini into the Pixel hardware, Amazon is left on the outside looking in.
Precisely. They need a pocket-sized vessel for Alexa. They want a device where an advanced generative AI seamlessly bridges your Amazon shopping habits, your smart home devices, your Prime media consumption, and your daily schedule without having to ask Apple or Google for permission to access the user.
They are trying to build the ultimate walled garden.
They are.
But not everyone is building walls. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, Bluesky just secured a $100 million Series B funding round.
That's a huge injection of capital.
They are operating under a new CEO, Jay Graber, and their entire pitch is the exact opposite of Amazon. They are pushing the AT protocol, a decentralized social network.
The contrast between Amazon's strategy and Bluesky's strategy highlights the defining philosophical battle of the modern internet. Amazon, Meta, and Google operate centralized, highly integrated ecosystems where they dictate the algorithm.
Right, they decide what we see.
They decide what content you see to maximize their ad revenue.
So how does Bluesky's AT protocol actually work differently under the hood?
The AT protocol is a federated network. Instead of one massive corporate server hosting everyone's data and applying a universal algorithm, the network is composed of many independent servers that can talk to each other.
Okay.
Users have the power to choose their own algorithms or build their own moderation filters. Your digital identity isn't locked to a specific company. It is portable.
That sounds complicated for the average user, though.
It can be, but the fact that investors just handed them $100 million indicates a serious financial bet that users are growing fatigued by centralized walled gardens and will migrate toward open protocols.
It is a battle for the soul of the web, and it is a battle playing out on a geopolitical scale as well. Alibaba has just unveiled Qwen, which current benchmarks show is the strongest AI model developed in China.
Yes.
Yet the tech analysts note it still lags behind the capabilities of its U.S. rivals like OpenAI and Anthropic.
The geopolitical AI race is not simply a matter of national pride. It is a race for industrial and economic supremacy. The nation that masters applied artificial intelligence first gains an insurmountable advantage in logistics, military strategy, and manufacturing.
Speaking of manufacturing, Jeff Bezos is reportedly seeking to raise $100 billion.
Billion with a B.
And his goal is to acquire old, legacy manufacturing firms and completely transform them by injecting them with artificial intelligence.
This is the critical juncture where AI moves from software screens into the physical, heavy industry world. Bezos is looking at outdated factories that rely on analog systems and fragmented supply chains.
Okay.
His vision is to deploy advanced robotics, AI-driven predictive maintenance, where machines know they are going to break before they actually do, and fully automated supply logistics.
But a $100 billion injection of automation into legacy industries, what does that do to the human workforce?
It threatens a massive turbulent disruption of the blue-collar labor market. While it promises incredible gains in production efficiency and could potentially reshore a significant amount of manufacturing back to the U.S., it simultaneously renders traditional assembly line labor obsolete.
Yeah, people are going to lose jobs.
The societal transition period will be fraught with economic anxiety.
And as we trust these digital systems more and more with our infrastructure, we are realizing how incredibly vulnerable they make us.
Oh, the Strava leak.
There was a massive operational security breach this week involving the French military. A French naval officer simply went for a 36-minute jog. He tracked his run using the Strava fitness app.
And because his privacy settings were misconfigured, his location data was uploaded to the public global heat map.
Right. But he wasn't jogging in a park in Paris. He was jogging on the deck of the French aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, while it was deployed.
Unbelievable.
He inadvertently broadcast the exact classified location of a multi-billion-dollar strategic military asset to the entire internet.
It is the ultimate terrifying paradox of modern security. Militaries spend decades and billions of dollars developing stealth technologies, radar-absorbent materials, and encrypted communications to hide these vessels. Yet those vessels are staffed by thousands of human beings carrying civilian smart devices that constantly ping commercial GPS satellites.
It is like building an impenetrable digital fortress with quantum firewalls and biometric locks, only to leave the back door wide open because someone wanted to count their daily steps and get a dopamine hit from an app. Ha!
Ah, yes. It highlights a critical flaw in modern defense. In the digital age, operational security cannot solely be a top-down technological shield. It requires absolute, flawless behavioral discipline at the individual level. A single smartwatch compromised a naval fleet.
And that careless digital exposure is blending with active digital deception. During the military escalations this week, social media was flooded with viral videos claiming to show Iranian soldiers being actively bombed in Tehran.
Right, saw those.
They were heavily shared, specifically amplified by pro-Israel accounts. But investigative journalists quickly debunked them. They were entirely synthetic, AI-generated deepfakes.
This is the weaponization of generative AI in a theater of war. During times of acute conflict, public demand for information spikes dramatically, but the fog of war makes verified facts incredibly scarce.
So people just believe whatever they see.
Bad actors use AI to flood that information vacuum with hyper-realistic, emotionally charged synthetic media. The goal isn't necessarily to convince everyone the video is real.
Then what is it?
The goal is to create enough outrage and confusion to manipulate public sentiment and force political leaders into hasty, aggressive reactions based on manufactured events.
And this blending of digital warfare and physical military operations brings us to the most critical juncture of our deep dive. The deepfake videos and the app leaks are micro-symptoms of the macro tensions currently boiling over on the global stage.
Very true.
We have to look at the intersection of climate extremes and the escalating geopolitical energy war.
I want to preface this discussion by acknowledging the volatility of the situation. We are navigating a deeply complex, politically charged crisis with profound human costs. Our objective is to impartially examine the events, the strategic maneuvers, and the cascading global impacts as reported.
Exactly. No taking sides, just unpacking the reality on the ground. And the reality right now is defined by extremes. Let's start with the climate data because it sets the backdrop for the resource wars.
Yes.
Yuma, Arizona just recorded a temperature of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That officially breaks the record for the hottest March temperature in U.S. history.
Achieving 110 degrees in March is a profound atmospheric anomaly. It places an immense premature strain on the regional power grid as air conditioning demand spikes months ahead of schedule.
And it hasn't even hit summer yet.
Exactly. It accelerates water evaporation in drought-stricken agricultural zones and poses severe health risks to vulnerable populations before summer even begins.
Meanwhile, the weather patterns in Europe are completely destabilized. The UK is enduring a severe temperature roller coaster, basking in unseasonably warm days, followed immediately by freezing, crop-damaging nights.
Right.
Further south, Storm Therese just dumped rare snow on Tenerife in the Canary Islands. The baseline stability of our climate is fracturing.
And this rapid environmental destabilization is forcing governments into grueling fiscal dilemmas. We see this manifested clearly in the latest budgetary decision for the UK government.
Right. UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper announced a massive cut to the nation's overseas climate spending. They are slashing it by over 10%, dropping the commitment down to £2 billion annually.
And the reason for the cut?
The stated reason for pulling funds away from global climate initiatives is to redirect that money into the UK's military defense budget.
That budgetary shift perfectly encapsulates the agonizing geopolitical dilemma of 2026. Governments are being forced to triage their survival.
It's a tough call.
The argument from the UK administration is pragmatic. Investing in long-term planetary health is meaningless if the nation's immediate sovereignty and security are compromised by the threat of global war.
But the critics argue that this is incredibly short-sighted.
Yes. The counterargument is that climate change is the ultimate global threat multiplier. Destabilized weather ruins harvests, creates water scarcity, and triggers mass migration. Cutting climate funding today virtually guarantees that militaries will be fighting vastly larger conflicts over diminishing basic resources tomorrow.
However, there are incredible advancements happening in the background to solve this energy puzzle. Fervo Energy is breaking ground on a 400-megawatt next-generation geothermal facility in Utah.
That is a major project.
And the projected cost is roughly 5 cents per kilowatt-hour, which is incredibly cheap for clean baseline power.
The innovation behind Fervo Energy is a fascinating pivot of existing technology. For decades, the fossil fuel industry perfected horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking to extract oil and gas from shale rock. Fervo has taken that exact same advanced drilling technology and is applying it to geothermal energy.
So it is like running Earth's geology in reverse. Instead of fracturing the rock to pull toxic fuel out, they are pumping water deep into the hot bedrock to harvest the planet's internal heat and bring clean steam up to spin turbines.
Precisely. They're using the sharpest tools of the fossil fuel age to build the engine of the clean energy age. And achieving 5 cents per kilowatt hour makes it economically hyper-competitive with natural gas.
And we desperately need domestic stable energy like that because the geopolitical reality of our current fossil fuel dependency just exploded.
I did.
The simmering conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran has escalated into direct, infrastructure-crippling warfare.
We need to walk through the sequence of these strikes carefully, as they represent a major escalation in target selection.
The initial shockwave came when Iran claimed, and they distributed video evidence to support this, to have successfully engaged a U.S. F-35 stealth jet with anti-aircraft fire. The jet was reportedly forced to make an emergency landing.
If the visual evidence is authenticated, this represents a significant psychological and tactical shift in the region. The F-35 Lightning II is widely considered the crown jewel of American air superiority, relying on advanced stealth to operate with impunity.
Right, it's supposed to be untouchable.
Exactly. Damaging one with ground fire challenges the perceived invulnerability of Western air dominance and emboldens Iranian defense forces.
In the wake of that incident, Israel executed a highly targeted military strike directly on Iran's South Pars gas field.
The South Pars field is not a minor target. It is one of the largest independent natural gas reservoirs on the planet.
Wow.
By striking it, Israel aimed a direct blow at Iran's primary economic lifeline, severely degrading their ability to generate revenue to fund their military and proxy operations.
The retaliation was swift, and the target selection was devastating for the global economy. Iran bypassed military targets and struck Qatar's Ras Al Khaimah gas facility. The reports estimate that this single strike has crippled Qatar's liquefied natural gas LNG capacity by 17% for the next 3 to 5 years. They also hit a Kuwaiti oil refinery.
This specific retaliation is the nightmare scenario that energy markets have feared. Iran is utilizing a strategy of mutual economic destruction.
Basically, if we go down, you go down.
Exactly. They are signaling that if their sovereign energy infrastructure is targeted, they will ensure the energy infrastructure of U.S. allies in the region burns as well.
But why does it take 3 to 5 years to fix the Ras Al Khaimah facility?
Because an LNG facility is not just a pipe pumping gas out of the ground. Natural gas takes up an enormous amount of space. To transport it across the ocean on ships, you have to chill the gas to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit until it becomes a liquid.
Minus 260.
Yes, which shrinks its volume by 600 times. Ras Al Khaimah is a massive, incredibly complex, highly pressurized refrigeration plant. You cannot simply patch a hole in a cryogenic compressor. Rebuilding that bespoke infrastructure takes years.
That's a long time to be offline.
Removing 17% of Qatar's export capacity is a devastating blow, particularly for European nations that heavily pivoted to Qatari gas to replace Russian supplies.
The economic shockwaves hit the markets instantly. Brent crude oil briefly spiked to $119 a barrel. The U.S. stock market reacted violently, with the Dow Jones dropping over 350 points as investors panicked over a massive resurgence of inflation.
And that inflation hits everywhere.
Right. Going back to the UK, the analytics firm Cornwall Insight is forecasting that typical British energy bills will surge by £332 a year starting in July, directly as a result of these strikes in the Middle East.
But the crisis extends far beyond the cost of heating a home or filling a gas tank. The military activity has heavily disrupted commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point.
Which affects everything on boats.
Yes. This disruption immediately caused the global price of urea fertilizer to spike by 35%.
This was the detail in the reports that truly stunned me. A missile strike hits a gas plant, and suddenly fertilizer prices skyrocket.
Because modern agriculture is entirely dependent on synthetic fertilizers, and urea is synthesized using massive amounts of natural gas. When gas supplies are choked and the ships carrying the fertilizer are delayed by war, the price explodes.
I hadn't even connected those dots.
A 35% spike means that farmers across the developing world simply cannot afford to plant their crops this season. The World Food Program is issuing dire warnings that this specific logistical disruption threatens the basic food security of 45 million people.
45 million?
We are drawing a direct, indisputable line from a geopolitical conflict in the Persian Gulf to a family unable to secure basic caloric needs.
It is terrifyingly interconnected. And the diplomatic landscape surrounding this crisis is incredibly fragile. Current U.S. President Donald Trump has vehemently denied any U.S. involvement in the Israeli strike on the South Pars field. He publicly compared the scale of the Iranian retaliatory strikes to Pearl Harbor, while simultaneously utilizing the moment to heavily criticize NATO allies for failing to provide adequate regional support.
President Trump's strategic messaging here is attempting to balance competing priorities.
Yeah.
By invoking the Pearl Harbor analogy, he is signaling a strong condemnation of Iranian aggression.
But he also denied involvement.
Yes, his explicit denial of U.S. involvement in the triggering Israeli strike indicates a desire to avoid dragging the U.S. military into a broader, direct regional war. His renewed criticism of NATO aligns with his administration's consistent demand that European allies shoulder a larger financial and military burden for global security.
And there's another angle to this, too.
Furthermore, reports indicate his administration's mediators have simultaneously offered a disarmament proposal to Hamas, suggesting an attempt to de-escalate peripheral conflicts through negotiated diplomatic tracks.
And there is clear friction with Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement firmly denying accusations that Israel is intentionally dragging the U.S. into this broader conflict. The diplomatic sources highlight a widening rift between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu regarding the ultimate military strategies being employed.
The tension stems from divergent end goals. Prime Minister Netanyahu maintains that Israel is executing an existential defense strategy, aiming to permanently degrade Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities and ballistic missile production.
Whereas the U.S. approach seems different right now.
The reported rift suggests the U.S. administration may prioritize containment, market stability, and avoiding prolonged military entanglement, whereas Israel seeks a definitive degradation of the opposing military apparatus.
The reactions from the rest of the global community are unprecedented. Switzerland has officially halted all weapons exports to the United States, explicitly citing their historic policy of absolute neutrality.
That is a massive symbolic development. Switzerland's neutrality is legally binding and deeply ingrained in their national identity.
Right.
Halting arms sales to a superpower like the U.S. indicates that the Swiss government views the current escalation not as a defensive posture, but as an active, volatile conflict they refuse to materially support.
And the criticism is coming from the global south as well. Brazil's president issued a blistering public statement criticizing the United States for acting like they own the world. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is threatening direct military action against Iran if their airspace or waters are further provoked.
The comments from Brazil reflect a mounting frustration across the developing world. There is a strong sentiment that the geopolitical chess matches played by global superpowers are profoundly destabilizing the global economy, spiking inflation and food costs at the direct expense of developing nations who have no say in the conflict.
In the midst of this chaos, exiled Iranian heir Reza Pahlavi released a transition framework for a post-Islamic Republic government. Crucially, he actively rejected any attempts at Chinese mediation in the conflict.
Pahlavi is attempting to leverage the extreme instability to legitimize himself as a viable democratic alternative. Why reject China, though?
By publicly rejecting Chinese mediation, he is explicitly signaling to Western powers that a post-regime Iran under his framework would align with Western democratic interests, resisting the growing sphere of Russian and Chinese influence in the Middle East.
It is high-stakes maneuvering. But while the Middle East burns, the European Union is dealing with its own internal sabotage over energy. Hungary, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, just vetoed and officially blocked a crucial €90 billion EU loan intended for Ukraine.
And the justification for that block reveals the harsh reality of energy politics.
Exactly. Orban blocked the $90 billion because Ukraine recently suspended the flow of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline, which runs through Ukrainian territory into Hungary. The reports describe absolute outrage among other EU leaders.
The Druzhba pipeline incident strips away the veneer of European unity. Prime Minister Orban is utilizing a purely transactional strategy. Hungary's economy is deeply reliant on that specific flow of cheap Russian crude oil.
So he's using the aid package as leverage.
He is weaponizing a massive, existential financial aid package meant for Ukraine's defense to essentially extort the resumption of fossil fuel deliveries from Russia.
Wait, let me ask you a direct question about all of this. We have Switzerland halting arms to the U.S. We have Brazil openly condemning American foreign policy. We have Hungary paralyzing the EU to protect Russian oil. Are we witnessing the real-time fracturing of traditional Western alliances under the sheer weight of this global energy crisis?
We are witnessing a severe structural stress test. I wouldn't call it a complete fracture yet, but it proves that these alliances are highly conditional.
Conditional on what?
When the global economy is prosperous and energy is cheap, political unity is easy to maintain. But when a crisis strikes, when oil spikes to $119, inflation surges, and agricultural supply chains are threatened, nations immediately retreat to their core, self-interested national priorities. The energy crisis lays bare the absolute limits of international solidarity.
And with global gas supplies crippled Qatar offline for 3 to 5 years, shipping lanes choked, how quickly will nations be forced to accelerate their adoption of green technologies, like the Fervo geothermal plant? Will they do it to save the climate or out of pure national security necessity?
The motivation will transition almost entirely to national security. The environmental benefits will be viewed as a welcome secondary byproduct.
Interesting.
The realization sweeping through defense departments and global capitals right now is that dependency on imported fossil fuels is an untenable strategic vulnerability. If an adversary's drone strike halfway across the globe can spike your domestic inflation and threaten your food supply, you do not possess true national sovereignty.
You're at their mercy.
The massive acceleration of domestic renewables, next-generation nuclear, and advanced geothermal will occur not to appease climate activists, but to protect the autonomy of the state.
It is the ultimate tragic irony of our time. We have brilliant scientists figuring out how to transform carbon waste into sustainable fuel using single-atom catalysts, and meanwhile, global superpowers are launching ballistic missiles over access to fossil fuel pipelines, inadvertently tanking global stock markets.
It perfectly illustrates the juxtaposition of humanity. Our greatest technological and scientific achievements running in parallel with our most primal, destructive resource conflicts.
And these massive global shifts, the wars, the energy spikes, the climate anomalies, they do not stay contained within the halls of government. They trickle down into the absolute fabric of our daily lives. They impact the sports we watch, the money we spend, and the institutions we rely on. Let's look at how society is shifting under this pressure.
The macro-level instability always bleeds into the micro-level culture.
Exactly. Let's look at the convergence of sports and digital finance. Major League Baseball, the MLB, just signed a highly publicized multi-year partnership with Polymarket. Polymarket is a crypto-based prediction market. And the reports emphasize that this deal is heavily regulated by the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
Think back to the Cloudflare AI prediction we discussed earlier, the digitization and automation of human behavior. This MLB deal paints a fascinating picture of our culture in 2026.
How so?
We are becoming a society obsessed with quantifying, predicting, and financially leveraging every conceivable human outcome. A prediction market is vastly different from traditional sports betting.
Yeah, I noticed that distinction.
You aren't just betting on a team to win. You are trading crypto shares based on the statistical probability of a highly specific event occurring.
It essentially turns every pitch, every inning, and every managerial decision into a micro stock market. But it is wild to see the MLB embrace this. This is an institution that historically banned players for life like Pete Rose for any association with gambling. Now, they are officially partnered with a crypto prediction platform. It shows how deeply financialized our entertainment has become.
But while baseball is grappling with financialization, global football soccer is dealing with massive structural and geopolitical disruptions.
Yeah.
FIFA just handed down a landmark ruling regarding international coaching.
Right. FIFA mandated that moving forward, all women's national football teams must have at least one female head coach or assistant coach on staff to be eligible for international tournaments.
This is a forced structural correction. For years, as the women's game grew exponentially in revenue, global viewership, and prestige, the lucrative coaching and leadership positions were still overwhelmingly captured by men.
I see.
FIFA is using its regulatory power to mandate a baseline of gender parity in the leadership of the women's sport.
But FIFA cannot regulate the geopolitical realities outside the stadium. Iran's Football Federation just announced an official boycott of the United States for the upcoming World Cup. They are formally requesting that FIFA allow them to play all of their scheduled matches in Mexico due to the escalating military tensions we just discussed.
It is a perfect example of why you can never truly separate sports from global politics. The World Cup is arguably the greatest display of international soft power.
For sure.
Iran is utilizing the massive global audience of the tournament to execute a high-profile protest against U.S. military actions. It places FIFA in an incredibly delicate diplomatic minefield, forcing them to balance tournament logistics with volatile international relations.
And the political drama in football isn't limited to the World Cup stage. Senegal has just been officially stripped of their Africa Cup of Nations title, their AFCON championship, for fielding an ineligible player during the tournament.
The reaction to that ruling highlights how deeply sports are entwined with national identity.
The sources say there is absolute outrage in Dakar. Fans are taking to the streets, calling for mass protests against the sports federation.
For a nation, winning a major continental tournament is a profound moment of collective joy and unity. When a bureaucratic ruling regarding paperwork and eligibility strips that title away retroactively, it feels to the populace like a literal theft of national pride. The emotional fallout is immense.
Finally, let's look at the ultimate arbiter of our societal stability, the financial sector. Because the institutions designed to hold our economy together are under unprecedented pressure. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is currently refusing to step down from his position.
The context here is vital. The Federal Reserve is intentionally designed to be politically independent.
Right.
Its mandate is to manage the nation's monetary policy interest rates and inflation based purely on economic data, completely insulated from the short-term political desires of the executive branch.
But President Trump has been openly and aggressively pressuring Powell to resign, wanting to reshape the Fed's monetary policy to align with his administration's economic goals. Powell is digging his heels in, stating he intends to fulfill his term and remain until a current Department of Justice probe is fully resolved.
Powell's refusal to yield is a massive real-time test of institutional resilience. Consider the economic backdrop we just explored. Global energy markets are in chaos, oil spiked to $119, Fertilizer prices are surging, and inflation fears are returning with a vengeance.
It's a mess.
During a time of extreme market volatility, confidence in the central bank is paramount.
So if Powell were to cave and step down due to political pressure, what happens to the economy?
If the global markets perceive that the Federal Reserve has bent to political will, that interest rates are being manipulated for electoral expediency rather than economic stability, institutional confidence would collapse. It would exacerbate the inflation crisis and trigger massive capital flight.
That sounds catastrophic.
Powell's refusal to leave acts as a stabilizing anchor for the markets, ensuring that, for now, monetary policy remains data-driven, even if it infuriates the political apparatus. It provides a necessary baseline of predictability in a world that is wildly unpredictable.
It is a high-stakes standoff for the very soul of the economy.
Okay, let's take a breath and bring this incredible journey full circle. We have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive.
We have mapped a very complex reality.
We started by looking into the elusive, foggy window of the cosmos. We discussed the invisible acoustic violence of the Artemis II moon rocket, the terrifying month-long silence of the Proba 3 mission, and the tragic irony of losing the MAVEN orbiter around Mars.
Right.
We explored how James Webb uses shadows and gravity wobbles to weigh invisible cotton candy exoplanets, and how we used light echoes to witness the billion sun explosions that we physically missed.
We saw how ancient galactic collisions shattered the small Magellanic Cloud, proving that the universe is shaped by violent gravity. Then we came back down to Earth and unearthed our own ancient history. We discovered that a 12,000-year-old apocalyptic freeze in Greenland was caused by the volcanoes beneath our feet, not a comet from the sky.
Which completely flipped the old theory.
We contrasted the raw, explosive power of Hawaii's Kilauea with our miraculous ability to engineer reality at the microscopic level using a single atom indium sniper rifle to turn carbon waste into clean methanol fuel.
We explored how mimicking the extreme post-meal metabolism of a python could cure human obesity, and how we are using biological scaffolds to grow living, breathing organs in a lab.
We navigated the shifting digital frontier, bracing for a 2027 internet where AI bots outnumber human beings, where decentralized protocols battle corporate walled gardens, and where a single, careless smartwatch app on a jogging naval officer can compromise a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier.
And we unpacked a world on the absolute boiling point.
Unprecedented 110-degree heat waves in March. A global energy war where missile strikes on gas pipelines in the Middle East threatened to starve 45 million people by spiking the cost of agricultural fertilizer.
Yeah.
A fractured geopolitical chessboard where neutrality is tested, where the global south pushes back, and where alliances crumble over the sheer necessity of accessing Russian oil.
It is a world defined by extreme, almost unbelievable contrasts.
Which brings me to this final thought, a question I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Think deeply about the spectrum of human capability we discussed. We have engineers who have learned to mathematically model the chaotic fluid dynamics of water just to silence the deafening roar of a moon rocket.
It's incredible.
We have scientists who have literally figured out how to rearrange our own toxic carbon waste atom by atom into sustainable fuel. We are successfully growing functioning organs in laboratories. We possess the sheer scientific brilliance to manipulate the cosmos, to reshape our own biology, and to rewrite our atmosphere.
The capacity for human innovation is boundless.
Yet, as the geopolitical conflicts and the energy crises in the Gulf so painfully show us, despite all that towering brilliance, we are still violently launching missiles at each other to control the ancient buried remains of fossilized plants. So the question to mull over is this: what will it take for our geopolitical maturity to finally catch up to our scientific brilliance?
That is the defining question of our era.
Thank you for taking the time to get well informed with us today. The world is incredibly complex, it is loud, and it can feel overwhelming. But understanding it, seeing the hidden connections between a silent galaxy, the blood of a python, and the fuel in your car doesn't have to be. Until next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. How does a single localized missile strike in the Middle East instantly dictate the price of bread in a street market in India and, push UK borrowing costs to a 15-year high? Today, we are looking at a global economy that is just terrifyingly fragile.
Exactly. I mean, we used to think of international markets as this self-correcting machine, right? We told ourselves the global order had built-in redundancy, but the escalating energy war we're seeing right now, it proves otherwise. We have Israel's recent strike on Iran's South Pars gas field, setting off a massive chain reaction.
Right, and then Iran retaliating with those devastating strikes on Qatar's Ras Laffan facility and a Kuwaiti oil refinery, too.
Yeah.
The fallout hasn't just been regional, it's entirely systemic. We are talking about surging borrowing costs in Europe, extreme market volatility, and acute food insecurity across the global south.
It's exposing the reality that a localized conflict can instantly upend the livelihoods of billions of people. The structure is basically shattering under the pressure.
Which brings us to the core of our discussion today. Do these planetary disruptions demonstrate the urgent need to, reinforce unified traditional security frameworks to deter aggression and protect global markets?
Or do they expose the fundamental unsustainability of a unipolar, fossil fuel-dependent global order, proving the absolute necessity of a multipolar diplomatic and economic redesign?
I will be arguing that this crisis underscores the necessity of a robust international deterrence and alliance cohesion to secure critical trade routes and stabilize global finance.
And I will argue that the fallout actually reveals the failure of Western-centric unilateralism and the extreme fragility of a global economy tethered to fossil fuels, which necessitates a rapid shift toward multipolarity and systemic resilience.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how we should read the current data. The market volatility we are experiencing is not proof that the system is inherently flawed. It is a direct consequence of aggressive state actors exploiting vacuums in international deterrence.
Right, but
Let me just lay this out. When vital infrastructure is attacked, the entire planetary economy suffers. Let's look at the mechanics of the Ras Laffan plant strike in Qatar. Current projections show that the damage will reduce Qatar's liquefied natural gas export capacity by 17% for 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that is a massive deficit for Europe, especially as they try to transition off Russian gas.
Exactly. It is not a blip. It is a multi-year hole in global energy supply. And the mechanisms of consequence are frankly brutal and immediate. We saw Brent crude briefly touch $119 a barrel.
Wow.
Right. We have seen a severe pullback in global stock indexes. And perhaps most tellingly, UK borrowing costs have hit their highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. Why? Because bond markets are looking at that 17% drop in LNG and pricing in years of inflation driven entirely by energy scarcity.
Well, they're pricing in the panic, sure.
But it proves that global economic stability requires rigorous defense of physical trade routes and unwavering alliance commitments. When we retreat into fragmented regionalism, we just invite the exact kind of aggression that cripples the global financial architecture.
I come at it from a different way. The crisis does not prove we need more of the same traditional deterrence. I mean, it proves that the current unipolar, fossil fuel-reliant system is inherently broken. The global backlash against this paradigm is undeniable, and it is playing out loudly on the diplomatic stage right now.
You mean the UN responses?
Yes, and regional leaders. Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busadi has explicitly criticized the United States for being dragged into what he termed an unlawful war by Israel without consulting Gulf states.
And we're hearing similar sentiments across Latin America, to be fair.
Exactly. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has publicly rebuked the U.S. for unilateral actions, demanding UN Security Council mediation instead. He is pointing out the core structural flaw here. A few powerful nations acting unilaterally can drag the entire world into chaos.
But
And just to finish the thought, the physical consequences are devastating for the global south. Because of these geopolitical conflicts, nations like India are being forced to revert to dirtier biomass fuels. They are literally burning wood and crop waste just to keep the lights on, which carries a massive public health cost.
right.
In Latin America, Cuba is enduring 20-hour blackouts. They've militarized their streets due to oil blockades and extreme supply shortages. When the geopolitical maneuvering of a few nations forces billions into darkness and energy poverty, it is clear the world requires a multipolar diplomatic approach and a rapid, aggressive transition away from systemic resource vulnerabilities.
You say this multipolar diplomacy is functioning, but look at the cost of that supposed independence on the global markets. The fragmentation you are describing, which you frame as a necessary shift to multipolarity, is actually creating a highly dangerous vacuum.
How is a vacuum dangerous if it allows for regional autonomy?
Because abandoning unified deterrence simply emboldens adversaries. We are seeing alliances fracture right now under the pressure of energy needs, and it is paralyzing the international community's ability to respond. Look at the European Union.
You're referring to the internal vetoes.
Yes, specifically Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. He is currently blocking a €90 billion loan meant to support Ukraine's survival. He is holding that vital aid ransom over Russian oil deliveries through the Druzhba pipeline, which ironically translates to the Friendship Pipeline.
Right.
Because Hungary is landlocked, they are exempt from EU seaborne sanctions, and Orbán is leveraging that loophole to extract political concessions. And it's not just Hungary. You have Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever openly advocating for pragmatic talks with Putin specifically to secure energy. This fragmentation is precisely what invites chaos.
But how does diplomatic pragmatism invite chaos? That's diplomacy in action.
Because when nations prioritize short-term bilateral energy deals over unified security frameworks, we slide back into the kind of disorder we saw in the 2011 Libya model. In that instance, the dismantling of institutional frameworks and the removal of a centralized authority didn't lead to some democratic utopia.
No, it led to a power vacuum.
It led to a decade of regional warlords, open slave markets, and a total collapse of regional stability that eventually spilled directly into European energy markets. We need a cohesive, rules-based order to prevent energy from being used as a weapon of political blackmail.
But, the rules-based order you're defending has historically been a unipolar order that serves Western interests, and the rest of the world is realizing they can forge their own path without Western hegemony. What you call dangerous fragmentation is actually the Global South successfully organizing itself outside the traditional power structures.
Can you give me an example of that actually working to stabilize a region? Because I don't see it.
Absolutely. While the West is paralyzed by internal debates over energy and defense, we see Russia delivering 29 tons of humanitarian aid to flood-hit Mozambique. We see successful de-escalation talks between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda happening in Washington, showing that regional actors are actively renegotiating their own balance of power.
In Washington, though,
But finding diplomatic solutions without defaulting to Western dictates. Even within the context of Iran, the exiled heir, Reza Pahlavi, is attempting to shift Tehran's diplomatic relations away from Beijing and Moscow. He's outlining a transitional framework that doesn't rely on Western military intervention, but rather on internal legitimacy. The multipolar diplomacy you fear is already functioning. Countries are realizing that hitching their economic and physical survival to a single, unipolar security apparatus is a liability, not a safeguard.
Wait, let me stop you there. If we celebrate this fragmentation as multipolarity, aren't we just romanticizing global instability? Let's talk about the shadow fleet for a second.
Okay.
When a French Navy vessel has to seize a Russian oil tanker flying a false flag in the Mediterranean just to enforce sanctions, it shows that without a centralized rules-based order, we are left with a maritime Wild West.
Explain the mechanism of the shadow fleet for a moment, just to be precise about what the French were actually intercepting.
Sure. So, a shadow fleet is a network of aging, mostly uninsured ships that operate off the grid. They turn off their transponders, they constantly change their names and flags, and they conduct ship-to-ship oil transfers in the middle of the ocean specifically to smuggle sanctioned oil.
Right.
That French operation was completely necessary to intercept a vessel from Murmansk trying to circumvent the very sanctions designed to penalize aggression. These uninsured ships are an environmental disaster waiting to happen. If every region just forges its own path, as you say, the physical and environmental security of international waters collapses entirely.
That assumes the centralized enforcement is actually working to stabilize things, rather than just accelerating the conflict. Because the moment that diplomatic order fractured, the economic reality hit hard. The diplomatic fracturing we just discussed is bleeding directly into worldwide financial markets, and the tools of the unipolar order are demonstrably failing.
they are not failing. They are reacting to raw, unprecedented economic data that is forcing the hands of central banks globally. I mean, the financial hemorrhage is severe. The Dow plunged 350 points on the news of the Gulf strikes. And because Brent crude spiked, trader expectations for a Federal Reserve rate hike surged to 50%.
Let's dig into why that matters, though, for the average person.
It matters because rising bond yields are a massive warning sign. Central banks set baseline interest rates, sure, but bond yields are the market's actual expectation of the future. Investors are demanding higher payouts because they expect inflation to become unanchored, meaning they believe central banks are losing their grip on rising prices driven by energy scarcity.
Right.
And look at the currency markets. The Indian rupee plummeted to an all-time low of 93 against the US dollar. Let's trace the causality there. India imports over 80% of its oil. When Brent crude spikes, India has to sell massive amounts of its own currency to buy US dollars just to afford the oil on the global market.
Yeah.
That mass sell-off plummets the rupee, instantly wiping out the purchasing power of 1 billion people.
Which is a devastating systemic vulnerability.
It is. And to stabilize this, pragmatic economic leverage is absolutely required. The situation is so dire that the U.S. Treasury is even considering the extraordinary step of waiving sanctions on some Iranian oil that is already at sea to avert a total global energy crisis. That is not a failure of finance. That is the strategic, pragmatic deployment of economic tools to stabilize markets when kinetic deterrence, actual military force, is strained.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The very fact that the U.S. is considering lifting those sanctions exposes the total hypocrisy and the fundamental failure of weaponizing finance in the first place. Sanctions are presented as this surgical tool, but they are incredibly blunt and often entirely counterproductive.
How are they counterproductive if they limit an adversary's funding?
Because previous sanctions clearly did not deter Iran's military capabilities. Even under heavy sanctions, they managed to develop advanced radar and missile tech, and they just claimed to have successfully struck a U.S. F-35 stealth jet, forcing it into an emergency landing. What sanctions actually do is enrich domestic defense sectors while devastating ordinary citizens.
Well,
think about the human capital operating this global economy. There are 35 million South Asian migrant workers in the Gulf right now.
I hear what you're saying about the migrant workers, I really do.
But their workplaces have quite literally become war zones because of the weaponization of finance and the failure of traditional deterrence. We have families in India mourning marine engineers killed in missile strikes on commercial ships near Iraq. The financial tools you're praising aren't choking off aggression. They are trapping civilians in a conflict zone while failing to stop the missiles.
Viewing sanctions as a failure because they cause economic friction is, frankly, like refusing to cut the fuel line to a runaway engine. Yes, the ship violently stalls and the passengers get bruised. That is the very real economic collateral damage. I acknowledge that. But if you don't cut the fuel line, the engine explodes, taking everyone down with it.
But
the friction is the point. It is the only non-kinetic tool capable of choking off the resources funding this aggression before it engulfs the entire market. If we do not use unified financial leverage, the alternative is direct, unlimited military confrontation, which would cause infinitely more suffering for those 35 million migrant workers. The financial pressure is designed to force a diplomatic resolution.
But cutting the fuel line isn't stopping the engine. It's just starving the passengers while the engine keeps running on fumes. If we remove the sanctions, you argue the adversary gets fully funded. But keeping them means the most vulnerable sectors of the global economy collapse first. This leads us to the most visceral consequence of this crisis, which is the energy-food security nexus. We are not just talking about abstract financial markets or bond yields here. We are talking about basic human survival.
I agree on the stakes. Securing these global choke points, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, is not just about Western economic interests. It is literally about global food security. A lot of people forget how deeply intertwined natural gas and global agriculture actually are. The real aha moment here is realizing that modern agriculture is essentially just a way to turn fossil fuels into food.
Through synthetic fertilizers.
Yes. Natural gas is the primary feedstock for creating urea, which is the most common synthetic fertilizer.
It uses the Haber-Bosch process. You literally take nitrogen from the air and hydrogen from natural gas, put it under immense heat and pressure, and you make fertilizer. It takes massive, massive amounts of energy.
Right.
Without it, half the world's population wouldn't exist. When you block a gas pipeline or bomb a facility like Ras Laffan, you aren't just stopping cars from driving. You are literally stopping calories from growing. Because of these disrupted trade routes, the price of urea has surged by 35% just as the global planting season approaches.
It is terrifying.
It is a profound crisis. Without military and diplomatic pressure to secure these shipping lanes, agricultural yields will plummet. The World Food Program is already warning that 45 million additional people could face acute hunger if this conflict persists. The physical flow of energy must be defended by a unified security apparatus, or the global south will starve. The traditional security framework is the only thing standing between stable global agriculture and mass famine.
We absolutely agree on the severity of the threat, but we radically disagree on the solution. You look at a 35% spike in urea prices and say, well, we need more military intervention to secure the natural gas supply. I look at that same statistic and say, this is a blaring wake-up call regarding our completely unsustainable, fossil fuel-reliant food systems.
But
listen how countries are reacting today. We're watching India maneuver to urgently boost fertilizer imports from Russia and Belarus just to survive the season. That is a symptom of a diseased system. Instead of militarily defending an obsolete energy paradigm that requires, aircraft carriers to ensure people can eat, the world must aggressively transition to agroecology and sustainable infrastructure. It is entirely possible.
on a small scale, maybe?
Look at the Danish island of Samso. They have weathered the European energy crisis beautifully because they rely entirely on their own wind farms. They completely decoupled from the fragile global fossil fuel supply chain. True security isn't pointing a gun at a choke point in the Middle East. It's building a system that doesn't rely on the choke point in the first place.
Wait, let me stop you there. You're holding up the Danish island of Samso as the model. But how on earth do you scale an island's wind farm to support the synthetic fertilizer needs of 8 billion people? The math just doesn't work for the reality of today.
It takes investment.
Scaling that up requires decades of transition and trillions in capital. We live in the reality of today. The urea is needed today. The shipping lanes must be secured today. If we abandon the military protection of these routes while waiting for a utopian agroecological transition, those 45 million people the WFP warned about will not survive the decade.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that by continuously funneling billions into military operations to protect oil routes, we are actively defunding our own future?
How so?
The Pentagon is reportedly requesting an additional $200 billion to jumpstart operations related to the Iran war. At the exact same time, we see the UK government literally cutting its overseas climate action budget by over 10% just to fund its military defense instead.
Budgets have to adjust to threats.
But they are stripping money meant to build climate resilience in developing nations to pay for traditional military dominance. We are mortgaging systemic sustainability, the very transition you say we can't afford, to protect a regional fossil fuel monopoly that is actively killing us. We are choosing to fund the fire instead of the fire department.
The geopolitical reality is that if authoritarian actors are allowed to dictate the terms of global trade by bombing infrastructure like Ras Laffan, the resulting economic collapse will wipe out any capacity we have to fund green transitions anyway. You cannot build sustainable infrastructure during a global depression.
And you cannot build sustainable infrastructure if you spend every available dollar defending the infrastructure of the past. The definition of security has to evolve beyond maritime patrols and sanctions.
Let's pull back and look at where this leaves us. Throughout this discussion, my stance has remained that true global stability and market confidence requires steadfast alliances. The shocks we're exploring, from Brent crude at $119 to the plunging Indian rupee to the 35% spike in fertilizer costs, demonstrate that we must be willing to project deterrence to protect the physical flow of energy and finance across the globe.
Yeah.
Retreating from a unified, rules-based order only invites state actors to weaponize trade, leading to the kind of catastrophic financial and physical insecurity currently threatening the globe.
And my position is that the current geopolitical and economic shocks are exactly what happens when a system is rigid and outdated. The chaos we are analyzing isn't a call to double down on unipolar military deterrence. It is a symptom of a world dangerously tethered to fragile fossil fuel choke points.
Right.
Achieving genuine, lasting stability requires us to embrace multipolar diplomacy, allowing the Global South a real voice, and urgently decoupling our economies and our food systems from a resource model that requires perpetual warfare to maintain.
If there is a point of convergence here, it is our mutual recognition of the profound, undeniable interconnectedness of global energy markets, high finance, and basic human food security. We are looking at a paradigm where a localized missile strike in the Middle East instantly alters the price of bread in a market in India and shifts the monetary policy of central banks in Washington and London.
Absolutely. We both agree their regional conflict now instantly dictates the livelihoods of billions. The systemic integration is absolute. Where we maintain our disagreement is the prescription. You see the solution in reinforcing a stronger, unified security apparatus to guard the existing structure, while I see the only viable path forward as a fundamental redesign of our global economic dependencies and diplomatic frameworks.
It is a critical moment to view these massive events through both the lens of immediate geopolitical security and long-term systemic resilience. As these market shifts and diplomatic realignments continue to unfold in the source material, it is clear there is much more depth to explore.
Indeed, the tension between managing the crises of today and building the structures of tomorrow isn't going away.
We leave the final judgment to you, the listener. Think back to the idea of the global economy as a massive suspension bridge. The wind is howling, the cables are straining, and glass is cracking. The question remains, do we send out the military engineers to desperately reinforce the old steel, or is it finally time to start designing a new bridge entirely? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.